what we typically find is you're going to compromise somewhere, that you can lift that and apply it to the freelancers that you're going to be bringing in. And that's not the case. And if there's one thing that we've learned with freelancers is they don't like to have their time wasted.
Hi there, welcome to Outsized Advantage. I'm Niclas Thelander, founder of Outsized. Got with me today Johann van Niekerk, CEO and Head of Africa. Hi there.
Hi, pleased to be with you.
Yeah, good to have you. Today we are going to talk about some of the mistakes we see some companies make when they hire freelancers. So we'll discuss a bit what the things are companies tend to get wrong and what you can do to avoid those mistakes. But I was thinking maybe, Johann, you could start by just setting the scene a little bit in terms of when we talk about freelancers or independents, what do we kind of mean by that?
Sure. So in the outsized world, we're talking very specifically about independent professionals, typically about 7 to 20 years worth of experience, and they are practitioners, often technical experts, may have been in management, but definitely not the kind of micro gig workers, definitely not in the expert network type band, and we'd mostly be talking about full-time independent professionals who are looking for work opportunities where the contract is, say, 6 months full-time. Obviously we move around, but that's pretty much our standard.
Okay, good. So that's kind of the context. So not like the gig workers as such. Cool. So maybe if we think through the process of actually, when companies are hiring independents, what is the first thing that kind of can cause a problem for companies?
Okay, I think what we need to see is that context matters. And generally speaking, there's kind of two buckets into which the opportunity would fall. And that is that you either need a contract worker for a role, perhaps somebody has resigned or a role is open, is vacant for a time, but it's a role and it was generally filled by a permanent employee, or it's a project. And that context matters because in the one side, you have roles and responsibilities as you would have with a permanent employee. And in the other, you have a project where the project is looking to achieve certain very defined goals over a set period of time. So that's the broader context. And then within that, we then talk about the individual who's coming needs to have a very properly defined scope. So what is it that you are bringing them in to do on this contract basis? And one of the major errors that is made is that this is not well thought through upfront or communicated very well when going out to search for the right freelancer. So what is the context into which they are coming? Is it a role? Is it a project? And then within that, what are you expecting them to do? Is it well defined? And so before you set out on this journey to go and even consider who you should bring into your organization, you should be thinking about, am I clear on what I expect from them? Because this is going to have a direct impact on the quality of person that you get. Have they done this type of work before? Are they a good match? Do they have the background and the skills that you need for those specific deliverables? Because there is a fundamental difference between a contractor who's coming in where they're expected to achieve certain goals and then likely leave versus a permanent employee who will be working on multiple projects over a long time. And that's why we talk about the responsibilities often in a job description.
And do you also run into the issue of companies not being sure if they want a contractor or an independent consultant versus a permanent employee?
Yes. We do see this where a stakeholder at a company is, hopefully not fishing, but not exactly sure what they're looking for. And in fact, just looking for the right talent. And so casting the net wide. And while it's understandable at certain times, the problem is that if you're not serious about the fact that you need a contractor or that you are prepared to bring somebody in on a contract basis, you do run the risk of running up a reputation in the market as a business that is just fishing and never serious about the fact that you will contract. And if there's one thing that we've learned with freelancers is they don't like to have their time wasted.
And what I think what we've also learned is that freelancers and independents, they have a network, right? So they speak to other independents, so that reputation
Yes.
can, good or bad, can spread quickly in the market. So that's a useful point. Anything else in terms of that kind of initial process of defining, what are you looking for? Whether an independent or a perm or anything about the actual scope or the role description. Is there anything else that companies should think about?
Whoever you're using, be it Outsized or somebody else, that you're very clear with them. And so this is also why it's often very important about who within your company is involved in this process. It's very easy to have one of those situations of broken telephone where you're passing information on to an HR person, on to somebody else, and they're passing it on, and you don't really get to the heart of what it is that you need. And almost always there's very specific things that you need, the really most important, crucial things. And we find that if we can talk directly to the hiring manager, you do get to that information. So being prepared to take a little bit of time to communicate that from the right person to who is assisting you, hopefully that's Outsized, but having the right person to communicate that makes a big difference.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I assume now everything is clear. The company knows they want an independent. They know exactly what this person is supposed to be doing once they kind of get hired. But before they get hired, there's a process as well, right? So talk us through a little bit what your experiences have been there. If there are any kind of common challenges that companies face, or kind of approaches that they have that don't always work out.
Yeah, I think one of the common mistakes is assuming that because you have a well-defined and set recruitment process that you use for your permanent employees, that you can lift that and apply it to the freelancers that you're going to be bringing in. And that's not the case. We really find that the processes, just very generally speaking, are far longer when it comes to permanent employees, and you can understand that. It's really about doing due diligence on them. And so those take a lot longer, whereas the freelancer is not going to sit around and wait for that. They have options, they are available now, and they want quick decisions. And so this is one of the common problems, is really about assuming that you can take that process and apply it there. So things like multiple rounds of interviews and psychometrics, and maybe even just the feeling that you can take that time. I think with permanent employees, they're in a job, they're earning a salary. If you take another 2 weeks, they'll wait for you if they're really interested in that job. Unfortunately, if you're an independent who's come to the end of your contract term and now you're waiting, you're not going to hold out and hold out and hold out, right? You will have a few options on the table, and whoever's able to expedite that process is probably the one that you'll go with.
I think that's true, especially I guess in the segments where we operate, which it's often the case that these independents are in highly sought after skills areas, right? So as you said, it's it's a little bit snooze and you lose from the company's perspective if they take too long.
Take too long. And this, I think, speaks to a number of areas within the business. There is the hiring managers, there's HR processes, there's also procurement. Yep. And often it's a combination of those that really sort of pulls this process out. And there's huge scope to become an employer of choice for freelancers by taking a look at this and having a very defined process for your freelancers specifically.
Okay. In terms of just one thought I had when starting the process, in terms of what to pay the independents, right? Is that is that typically clear from the beginning? What the company's, what the market rate, so to speak, is for a certain type of independent or freelancer, or is that kind of is there some sort of a price finding happening through the process? And can you talk me through that?
Yeah, I think it tends to be the latter. If we're honest, in the markets where Outsized plays, this is a growing market and people are making more and more use of independence. But it's not an established practice by any means. And for many, an individual manager, it may be the first time that they are interacting with an outsized or with an independent. And so there isn't this understanding. I think, again, one of the big problems is, we spoke about it early on, if you're bringing somebody into a role, so perhaps again, as I said, somebody has resigned and now you've got a 6-month period in which you know you need to recruit, but you want to fill that gap. You cannot assume that whatever you had for the headcount for that salary, that you're simply going to be using that for an independent. It's fundamentally different. So we do come across this, that within the markets, there's not a common understanding, there's not as many benchmarks, and so that's where we play a role in guiding our clients. But yes, it is a problem when you have very stringent and strict budgeting requirements internally or restrictions, and then what we typically find is you're going to compromise somewhere. You're going to have to compromise on contract length, or you're going to compromise on the seniority and the quality of the type of resource that you get, which is really not what you want to do. You want somebody who can come in and hit the ground running.
In terms of the kind of the price for the independent or the day rate, so what are some of the components that companies could think about in terms of arriving at, you know, that a realistic kind of number for what they're looking for?
Yeah, well let's maybe start with the permanent side of things. That's generally well understood, and most companies would have benchmarking or salary bands, so they'll have an idea what they would be paying an employee. Right, well, you're also giving that employee leave, so you need to make allowance for that, because the independent is not going to earn if they're not working. So we take that out. Let's say that comes up to a month a year. And you're also going to pay for sick leave. Now, we hope that's not the case, but again, it could be a week or so. Permanent employees would earn a bonus, whereas your independent will not. And then there may be other factors like desk space or office costs, all of which you could factor into a permanent employee, which would not be the case, especially if you've got somebody on a remote basis. So all of this you can factor in. And then, of course, you should expect to pay a premium for taking somebody on a contract basis, where you sit with the power to cut that contract short, should you need to. And this is exactly the value of flexible resourcing, the ability to flex up, that's fantastic, but also to flex down. And so there's a cost, an implicit cost to that, and there's value to that. And so when you put all of this together, you know, it's anything from 30 to 50% more than a salary. But you cannot just take salary and compare it to a day rate or an hourly rate, because you're not comparing apples with apples.
And also, I think what we're finding is that independents are highly motivated. They come in and they kind of deliver, you know, to very high expectations kind of from day one. So you have the cost side on the one side, but you also have the outputs on the other side, which is, you know, obviously there's lots of great permanent employees. I'm not saying, you know, that they're not, but with independence, especially in kind of the higher skills areas, you typically get very driven people who, you know, they're entrepreneurs in a sense, right? So they need to deliver at the maximum all the time. And
I often say the most exposed entrepreneur is an entrepreneur of one, and they live and die by the quality of the work that they've recently done. And so, yes, I mean, they are internally motivated to come in and do a great job for your company.
Yeah, I think what we've seen, I mean, in the markets where we're not so present, like in Europe or US, there is a more established kind of benchmark for what the typical uplift versus a permanent salary is, and that's, you know, not dissimilar to what you said in terms of like 30-40% maybe in terms of what to expect. And obviously each case has its own dynamics, right? So, but I think that's a useful kind of
and I think
ballpark.
This is where you can rely on Outsized. We are your partner in this, and we have a good idea of market rates. We can also test these on your behalf. So when we think about the common mistakes that you can make from the start, rather talk to us, get an idea of what the rates may be. Obviously, once you go to market and you see who's out and who's available, it might differ somewhat, but rather know that in advance than come to us and as we said, use it as a fishing exercise.
Cool, great. So that's the earliest stages of kind of of the process of finding the right kind of match for you as a company. Let's say you've identified and you've agreed price and everything with the talent. So the day is approaching fast when they're supposed to start their role or their project. I guess the onboarding of the freelancer. What is it that you kind of are seeing there in terms of things that companies do well and maybe don't do so well?
Yeah. So as we'd said, in terms of the recruitment cycle, if it takes too long, you really run the risk of losing great talent because they will go somewhere else. It's actually the same once you have decided on somebody when you start thinking about contracting. Until there's pen on paper, so to speak, it would be electronic these days, but until an independent has a signed contract, they are still open to working anywhere. So one of the things is you need to really work hard with your partners internally to make sure that the contracting process is as speedy as possible.
Okay, so not just a verbal, hey, we want to hire you, until everything is kind of
yes,
agreed in writing. Freelancers will keep looking, right? Because it's there.
Well, I mean, you make a good point. So often, simple communication is already going to bring some comfort and some peace of mind to a freelancer, but that's not really what they want. They want a contract so that they can know when they're starting, what they're expected to do, that it matches what they were told in terms of what they're expected to do. So the contracting process is something that often takes a bit too long. Then I think it's easy for a hiring manager to feel I've made a decision. Again, on the permanent side of things, there are then processes that naturally run in terms of contracting, onboarding, and such like. And these are often not as well established or not established at all in terms of independence. And so contracting is one of them. Then the actual infrastructure, things like, do you need to provide them with a laptop? Do you need to source that? Do you need to arrange access, building access? There's all sorts of things like this that you not necessarily think about, but have a direct impact on can they walk through the doors physically or arrive electronically able to start. And so that's the logistical side of things. And then there's the actual onboarding. Just like with any employee who comes in, where you should be introducing them to the main decision holders and stakeholders, you should be making sure that they know where to find all the right information, be it online, models that they have to use, documents that they need to access, that they just know where to go and who to talk to. And also the incorporation into the team. We're very much moving to a world where hybrid is not just about who's in office or out of office, it's also who's perm and who's not perm. And so they're one team and they really should be seen as such. So bring them in, introduce them to everybody, make sure that they know who's who. And that's really going to facilitate an excellent start. And as we said, these are people who can come in and hit the ground running. Let's make sure they can do that.
Anything else kind of outside of these kind of 3 or 4 big areas that we've discussed that you think that you've seen companies kind of get wrong sometimes, or are these the main areas?
Well, we've touched on everything leading up to the onboarding, but then actually once they're on the go, it's easy to think of independence as working independently. And one of the things that we've seen is that if things don't work out for whatever reason, it's often because communication has been lacking during the process of the contract. So we really encourage, in the same way that you're giving 360-degree feedback or regular feedback to those members of your team, do exactly the same with the independent that you're working with. Remember, they're delivery-based. They're working on projects. They have deliverables. Every time a piece of work is expected or is delivered, review it, talk about it, give that feedback. As much as they are hitting the ground running, they are also sometimes new into your organization, have things to learn. And so that regular feedback makes a very big difference. The other is end it well. So when you're coming towards the end of a contract, think about, is this somebody that I would want to extend? And we often see that. If you think about that too late, again, they're thinking about the next job. So if you take too long, you risk losing them. And so hang on to the good ones that you need to extend. So think about that early. Do you want to extend? But if you're going to come to an end, communicate it early on so that they know that they can make plans to move on.
And when you say early on, when would a freelancer start looking for the next project or contract?
We would typically be talking to our clients 6 to 4 weeks before the end of a contract end, for your sort of typical 6-month project.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously, when there's an independent through Outsized, we remind them of that, but it might be useful for them if many companies obviously hire independents on their own, right? So and may not have a process for that, so that's useful. We're actually, I think you made a very good point in terms of what's happening when they're on the job or on the project, and we are actually going to have a special episode specifically around performance management and review kind of processes for independents in terms of how they need to be done, and there are some, you can't just take your standard kind of performance management system and apply to independent work. It's just like what we said in the beginning, you can't really take your permanent recruitment process to hire an independent for obvious reasons. So we'll get into that in another episode, but I think it was great that you highlighted it here. Any final thoughts or remarks on this?
If we accept that the use of independent freelancers is growing and is becoming more established, and in fact now forms part of your war on talent, as they say, then really all of these things that we've been talking about, it's a bit like in your business, you'll be looking for these small efficiency gains and they all stack up. And this is a reputation you want to build now in terms of being an employer of choice for independent freelancers. And so really, I think we're encouraging you to think about all of these aspects, to talk to the colleagues that are involved in all of these and talk to your partners like Outsized as to how you can improve these, because you made the point. There's a strong network amongst freelancers and they do talk to each other, and you want to be the brand that stands out as, even if you're not making as much use as somebody else, but being the place where they know what they're getting, they come in and they start well, it's a great working environment, they know that everything works smoothly in terms of the contracting, the onboarding, the recruitment, that they communicate it too well. And that's throughout the contract, not just a good start, but a good start, a good tenure and a good end. That's all going to make a big difference.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. Also in some of our markets, which are growing quickly, but the companies are partly still figuring it out. So by getting some of these basics right, you're already kind of well ahead of many companies, and will be in a very good position to kind of attract the top of, what do you call it, the cream of the cream of independence in many cases. So thank you. Great. I think that's probably a wrap for today. Thank you so much, Johann, for joining me.
Great pleasure.
And we'll speak soon again. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.